Chapter 3 The Creation of Male and Female. The amount of time this sentient energy field stayed as one being is impossible to say, as there was no current means to measure time, and it's not important anyway. The relative issue here is that the original first being became impatient with its singular existence. What happened next is paramount to all that exists. Being tired and a little anxious from being alone so long, this original first being split itself into two parts. Each part was similar in size but contained different energy frequencies. It didn't want a holographic copy of itself. It wanted actual company. Then it created a format of sorts within itself that all energy would also split into two parts, with only one exception. Since all sentient life initially came from the original first being, things still happen that way now. Now let's get to that exception. Angel spirit stays both male and female. Each angel spirit has a different percentage of both sexes, but it always contains both. This is Ji, and it is pronounced Ji. This was told to me by an angel in person outside a Whole Foods store, and later reinforced as true by flowing into the Akashic records. Angels make physical bodies to communicate with us, or just hang around for a short time to leave us messages of one sort or another. I'll talk about that later. That's a whole book by itself. Angels are awesome beings, but they're nothing like people think. Once the original male and female split itself into two separate parts, it began to develop separately, each half watching the other as it did. It was learning all it could from the process of sentient energy separating itself into two fields. It learned how its different components separated, looked, and then worked together once combined. It knew this information would be important for later. The original first beings were also learning which energies were compatible with each other and which energies caused specific problems. Do you see where this is going? It was learning how to manipulate its own energy into what it wanted to make for its own personal reasons at a later date. When something is benevolent, this can be used for good. When it is selfish, self-serving, with only its own desires in mind, it can be troubling for the spirit it creates. Here's the problem. The energy fields that created the original first being were happenstance. The energy field just happened to contain the ingredients to create a 27.5% negative frequency energy field that later became sentient. This is a lot for something as powerful as source energy. The current source energy about to control the flow of creation in a year is only 2.081% negative frequency for the male and less than 1% for the female, or mother source spirit. The new source, male and female, desire to serve and not to be served, unlike the original first being. They have strong heart energy that they've developed through their more than 10 trillion lives. This is directly related to the new life format for our creation, as well as the new creation coming. Here's an interesting little tidbit of information. There are 4 new first type beings growing right now in the first dimension. I'll talk about them and their frequencies later. Chapter 4. The first beings start building. At this time, the 2 original first beings, a female and male, had a sort of conflict or competition with each other. As 2 beings, they had company, but with 27.5% negativity. Rivalry and jealousy soon came into existence. They were still quite happy to have each other's company, but they began their own journey of self, or more accurately, selfishness. Let's leave this here for now. They started to flex the strength of their energy and play with it separately as well as together. Each time they released a wave of their spiritual energy, they watched, observed, and learned. As the 2 beings released a wave of their combined spirit, it eventually thinned out until the wave split into petite, malleable orbs of energy. This opened up new doors for the 2 beings. They realized that although these little orbs were small parts of themselves, the orbs were each a little different. It just seemed like a good way to continue themselves and their own existence with the addition of new varieties of spirit. The 2 beings now knew they could do this together. They could make more of themselves. As they remembered how they could continue to grow, it made sense that the new smaller pieces of them would do the same. This now brought up new questions and problems to solve. What amount of space was necessary to hold this new family? And how would the 2 beings control them? The control structure is what really took a lot of time. The 2 beings needed to release a sizable amount of themselves first. Then there needed to be some sort of control mechanism that could also be controlled. The thought process here was to have a large group of little selves and a much smaller group of controllers. None of these new beings could ever be allowed to be strong enough to confront them. The 2 beings had to remain the most intelligent and powerful at all times. Their abusive format for raising the smaller ones, as well as their arrogance, was their eventual undoing. They had no idea how it would eventually turn out for them. Negative frequencies cause many problems. Lack of insight is one of them. The two beings would also need room to house all these new parts of themselves. They were aware of their limited environment even before splitting itself into two separate beings. The original first being mapped out its environment while searching for companionship. It was obvious that room for the new beings was needed first. The two beings were also concerned that since they just came to be in the first dimension, eventually something else would too. It was time to build something new, isolated, protected. Chapter 5. Building the second dimension. How do you build a dimension? It's a little funny to me how we look at things as physical bodies compared with the realities of things as spirit. When you're not in a body, your spiritual energy is huge, while your spirit is compressed into a physical body to have a life. So much of it can't fit in it that your personal energetic field is larger than the state you're living in. Out of body, you're all over 100 times larger. This is a generic number, but the statement is true. Your intelligence is also relative to this fact. Trying to pour your intelligence into a physical brain of any type from any planet is like pouring a swimming pool into a water balloon. That's just not going to happen. As a spirit, you're all incredibly intelligent. Your body's brain might not be as advanced as the brains of others, but this is not relative to your free state on the other side. The two beings needed a new place with little else in the way of energy or spirit floating around in it. It would need to be a place large enough to hold more spiritual beings than currently existed. In order to compensate for further growth, it would need to be vast and expandable. The original first being was spirit, never in physical body form for all the time it had existed. Neither the female nor male part of the original first being had one life. This is one of the major reasons for our current problems. One must have lives before being able to properly set them up and run them. One needs to have experiences in order to understand how to make them flow together into a worthwhile experience. Welcome to the beginning of the second dimension. How do you build a dimension? What is it anyway? The first dimension was floating around in the vastness of nothingness that we call space. It's a cold void, a vacuum of anything other than energy and random heavy particulate matter. Here's how the second and third levels were first made. First, two barriers were built in the vastness of space. The first one surrounded the entire first dimension. The second barrier was extended way out from the first one. The second dimension dwarfed the original or first dimension. The second dimension was a large, suitable place, and it was empty except for the small amounts of heavy particulate matter floating around it. Spirit, in its natural form as sentient energy, could now float around and slowly evolve on its own. The key word here is slowly. The present growth rate was considered unacceptable for the first being. Here's a second cause of today's problems in our third dimension as well as the other dimensions: a forced growth rate. Due to the immense initial size of the second dimension, the male and female first beings considered a different manufacturing process for the third dimension. For the third dimension, they considered using a type of overlay. The two beings discovered that they could set up multiple dimensions by splitting an energy barrier and then separating different frequencies within that field by using more barriers while using a form of harmonic convergence to keep them close to each other and a part of one group, so to speak. Each layer would be built within and upon each other. This is about the best I can do at this time to explain how it happens. I can see how it occurs relative to the use of energy. This is how Era has done it so many times. I can't give you any kind of scientific formula for it, but please also remember this. It wasn't all that long ago that some scientists said a plane could not fly because of its weight and size. They also said the same of a bumblebee, even though they already knew it could. Scientists admit that there are always holes in our understanding. Science is a pursuit of understanding whatever knowledge we can attain in that moment. This should be expected in all forms of existence, including the metaphysical world, or realm as I like to call it. Even as sentient energy called spirit, we don't know everything and make mistakes. This is a simple truth. The sooner it can be accepted, the quicker one can grasp what's really going on in all dimensions. Nothing is perfect, but everything can learn and grow to become more than it originally was.